Well, they were wrongly convicted for beating and raping a white woman jogging in Central Park more than 30 years ago. 5 black and Hispanic teens known as the Central Park Five spent years in prison before being exonerated. Today, the city trying to right a wrong, giving final approval to honor the victims by renaming an entrance to the park, calling it the Gate of the Exonerated. Here's Jim Dolan.
Beneath the crataegus tree berries and the last amber leaves of autumn, you walk into iconic Central Park through entrances with names literally etched in stone. Pioneers Gate, Farmers Gate. Some are named for the best among us, for artists and artisans. And soon one, just now being carved, that will remind the city of an indomitable spirit of strength and survival.
We went through a hellified time, and it wasn't very easy. You know, people were spitting at us, calling us names, sending us threats, all kinds of evil types of things you wouldn't believe that was beyond their imagination that they were doing to us.
The Gate of the Exonerated will be unveiled next week at the north end of Central Park and is named for the Central Park Five, a group of African American and Latino young men who were wrongly convicted of a notorious 1989 rape in the park. Sharon Salam is the mother of Yusuf Salam, one of those wrongly convicted.
My son had just turned 15. He spent 7 years in prison and 3 years on parole as a sexual predator of the highest degree.
In time, another man confessed to the rape in Central Park, and the convictions of the Central Park Five were all thrown out. They chose the name of the new park entrance. Mrs. Salam says her son is better at forgiveness than she is, that it's difficult for her to forget all that was taken from him and the other young men, all the pain and frustration over so many years. But she says she takes some pride in knowing that finally an accurate description of her son and the other young men will finally be etched in stone.
Welcome to the Gilchrist Experience. I have the pleasure of being family to all these people, these 35 years that we've been around, and to see Yusuf as councilman today shows you, you know, how good God is. And we have on today, of course, Sharon. How do you like that opening?
Well, it looks pretty good to me. Yes,
surprised?
It does. Yes, yes. Very surprised.
Yeah. What do you think of that? That's the first time you've seen it?
Well, you know, I did see it on the TV.
Oh.
Not that opening, but the news article talking about the gate of the exonerated, yes. And
but did you see that one of yourself? Oh, you saw it?
Oh, the one of myself?
Yeah.
Oh, I was looking very good on that one. Yes, I was. Yes, I was. I was trying to hold it together because, you know, when you go through these things, you have to hold on to something. And sometimes it's nothing but a tissue or a key or whatever it is, but you have to hold on so that you can be ready for what comes next. And you never know what that's going to be. You know, because it took years for those boys who became men while they were incarcerated to be exonerated. And to hear people describe them when this incident occurred as men shows that we still have a long way to go. You know, because these kids were just, what, 14, 15, and 16 years old. It wasn't a man among them. But if you beat in someone's mind the idea that they are men doing evil things to innocent white women, then it's very easy for you to convince the world that whatever you do to them is all right.
Right.
And it's deserving.
Right.
Because these are men. It moves away your humanity from who they really are and what they really are.
Your strength shows and it gleams in your everyday appearance. I watched you go through the whole thing there.
Yeah.
And it's been so rewarding even to me. I mean, to see what Yusef has become
Yes, yes.
and becoming and help. Victor had a meeting with him today. Tell us about the meeting today, Victor.
Very substantive, very positive. There are some things that we talked about, that we shared. Of course, him and I have a shared history of being on the plantation, and now returning back to our community, trying to restore and trying to rebuild and trying to put our share in his purpose. So we see things from a different lens. Once you've been, on the plantation, and your eyes are opened up to a lot of things that you might not have been, cognizant of before. So when we talk about restorativeness, when we talk about second chances, when we talk about rehabilitation, you know what I'm saying? For us, it's a different lens because we understand the system is not about rehabilitation, it's about punishment, right? And when we look at, what we went through while we were incarcerated, you know what I'm saying, having a real up close and personal experience about what happens to people inside. Oftentimes, Sharon mentioned the inhumanity, the dehumanization, the demonization, and the taking away your spirit, which is built basically to break you. It didn't happen. It didn't happen to him, and it didn't happen to me, and it didn't happen to a lot of others. So now that we are out, we have an opportunity to try to right some of the wrongs because of the experiences that we have experienced. So our conversation was just about that particular paradigm and how we see the criminal injustice system, but more importantly, what things should be in place to try to fix that.
The correction is needed.
Right.
Since you personally
And what we can
experienced
do.
it.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Oh,
So
yeah.
this
That was a
gives-
good meeting. Let me say it like
what
that.
I see is an insight to all the other victims and people even rightfully convicted to see a way out of or get better treatment for whatever crime they've committed. Never mind the ones that are innocent, but the people that are really criminally liable and should be in jail. But to get them reformed and replaced so they can come back to society and add to society instead of taking away from society. So this is an outlet for that. But what we're dealing with now is wrongful convictions, and that's your organization is what again?
Justice for the wrongfully convicted.
And you have any you have an opportunity to
Actually, it's justice for the wrongfully incarcerated. See, I've been brainwashed into convicted. I've heard it so many times, so many times, so many times, so
Right.
now
You
I'm
just
saying.
start to say it regularly, right? Yes.
okay.
Yes, justice for the wrongfully incarcerated. But whether it's incarcerated or convicted, we're still talking about the same people
Right.
who are under certain pressures, who are incarcerated for certain issues, who may or may not be guilty of things that they are being accused of. And when we look at the people who are there, it's like, how do we bring them back into our society? What do we want? What do we want? Everybody's not going to be doing life, and everybody's not waiting to be executed by the state. The majority of the people who are incarcerated will return, and when they return, do we want them to fit into our society? Do we want them to be able to get jobs? Do we want them to get housing? Do we want them to help mend their families and come back together? What do we want? How do we see these people? In many cases, people see them as individuals who should always be marginalized. But how can you marginalize someone who's going to be staying right next to you? How do you make yourself feel safe? How are
Yeah.
they safe?
Right.
It's all about bringing people back into the fold.
Right.
But in many cases, we have a society that built on incarceration, and they
It's a
make
business.
millions off of
They make a business out
incarceration,
of it.
and they build laws around incarceration so that you continually going back into incarceration.
Right.
And it's very little rehabilitation that's done within these prisons. All of the prisons in the U.S. don't even have education programs where you can go in, you can learn a trade, or you can learn something that's going to help sustain you
But it
when you
used to
come
be
out.
like that.
Well, it used to be ain't always what it is, you
But
know?
that's how Malcolm got out
Mm-hmm.
and reformed. He was able to go to the library and read,
Mm-hmm.
and he had people behind him.
Right.
And that's the way Yusef got through it, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. I wasn't in there with Yusef, but I
you were
was
helping
on
by-
the outside
Mhm.
trying to make sure he had the best opportunity and
That's
chance
right.
he could. You know what I'm saying?
Surely
And
that's
that I
right.
tell everybody, if you have people who are incarcerated for whatever reason, or convicted for whatever reason,
Whatever, right or wrong.
right or wrong, make sure you get to that jail, that prison, and see who is there so that they'll know you coming.
If Mama don't show up, then you really know you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Well, Mama might not be able to show up. She might be too sick. Send a friend.
That's right.
Send an enemy. But send somebody.
Right.
Send somebody who
That's
can say,
right.
I'm here for Jack,
That's right.
John,
Whoa.
Harold, Howard, Sally, Sue, whoever. Send somebody. Because you don't want a system to believe that you are there on your own.
Mm.
You don't want people to think, well, we can do anything to that one because nobody gonna show up.
That's right.
Yeah,
So you always want to have somebody who coming. If they're in a different state, call somebody in that state. Call around, see who can go, see if you can get a church to go. It's people who visit people in prison.
Mm-hmm.
But the main thing is to have that kind of connection so that every now and then your loved one has an opportunity to talk to somebody other than themselves.
It makes a difference.
It makes a difference.
It does.
Graham, I mean, you being an ex-officer, you can add to both sides.
Yeah, you know, when I speak to young officers, I tell them that the reason they have that job is not for a paycheck. It's to make sure that justice is done. And what I mean is this: I worked on cases where I was able to prevent young folks from going to prison,
Mm-hmm.
helping them and proving that they did not commit the crime.
Right.
Being brought up on charges of insubordination once when I intervened in a case where they were trying to railroad a boy in a stabbing incident. And I did find that his photograph had been viewed by the victim and by witnesses. And there was a boy who looked identical to him, who lived in another borough. They looked like twins.
Mm.
But I intervened and made sure that this boy, his mother came from the Bronx at 1 o'clock in the morning to Brooklyn. And the sergeant wouldn't even let her into command. I brought her into the command and gave her coffee and whatnot, but he was irate. And I collaborated with the detective that had the case and prevented the lineup from going on. And these are the things that we have to do to protect our youth. Yes, there are young people out there doing a lot of dirty things, but there are a lot of young people out there who are being railroaded. The lineup process, where people are identified, many times is suggestive on the part of the detective. We have a detective that was in Brooklyn when Charles Hines was the DA, and the family and friends of the wrongfully convicted. Many of those young men who did time up to 27 years for crimes they did not commit were convicted in cases that this one detective had. So the Brooklyn District Attorney is reviewing those cases. They've already reviewed 27, and I don't know why this detective is still collecting a pension when what he did is part of an ongoing crime, because people have been falsely arrested, prosecuted, and still serving time for crimes they did not commit. But it's imperative that our young people prepare. We need young people in law enforcement to protect all people. There are over 3,000 people that have been exonerated for crimes that they did not commit across this country. And they are Black, they are white, they are Latino, they are Asian. They're amongst all groups. And we need to be well aware that this is not just a Black issue. It's an issue of the corruption within the system. So we've had Rennie and Reggie on before discussing their cases, you know, but this is critical because it is imperative that young men, I locked up a guy on a homicide just before I retired back in 1994. And I said to him, he was 17. I said, you can't bring the guy back. But what you have to do now is think about who the man you are going to be when you get out of prison. You can't wait until you get out to figure it out. You have to start becoming the man that you need to be. Go to school. And Sharoni said, you know, Bard College is available in some of the state prisons, but educational programs should exist in every institution across the state. We need people educated, prepared to work to get back into the mainstream of life so that they would be able to sustain themselves. Many young men have lost family members, friends, and they need help starting again. And this is something that should be part of the Department of Correction other than parole. My uncle was convicted of a crime by the federal courts. He was an EEO representative in the Department of State here in New York, and a Black woman had been passed over and a position was given to a white woman who was not qualified. My uncle spoke with the director and he told him, I don't care. He says, well, I have to do the paperwork. He said, do what you gotta do. They railroaded my uncle on a drug case, saying he was facilitating passports to drug dealers from Jamaica and sent him to federal prison. I went about every other week to Pennsylvania to see my uncle. 60 Minutes came to interview him when they got word of the case. So he was railroaded for doing what he was supposed to do in protecting a Black woman who was being passed over for promotion by a white man who wanted to take care of an unqualified white woman. All kinds of people in that prison were in prison for crimes they did not commit, but they were businessmen who were getting contracts that white people did not want them to get. All kinds of stories. There was a judge in there who was convicted of falsely accused. So this goes through all strata of Black society. You can be illiterate, you can be educated, you can be a high-level professional, but when they want to come after you, they're going to come after you. So we need an Alton Maddox. We need 100 Alton Maddoxes. We need our people functioning on every level to help protect the general public. And I'm so proud of Yusef. So proud of Yusef. You know, he's going to go beyond the city council, undoubtedly. And his demeanor, you know, he's a humble man. He's an experienced man. And Sharon, you know, it's because of you. And your level of development, education. People don't know your backstory and what you were doing before this incident occurred. But it is because of you. The Bible says, train up a child in the way that he should go, and you have done that. You have done that in spite, and I will never forget the fact that Donald Trump said, I hate them. He said, I hate these guys, and everybody should hate them. I will never forget that statement. The fact that he wanted to have them executed.
Never forget. That's right.
Thank you, Graham.
Forget.
That's representative of somebody that's gone through the system, been a cop for 20 years, and a God-fearing man. See, righteous and justice can come from anybody and everybody. So if we qualify for anything, do it the best that you can and be God-fearing and righteous and,
That's right.
and good to your people, to good people.
That's right.
Good people, not all people. There's one race, the human race. And we said last week about being human. It's hard to be human. But see, you came through this so human. You showed other people how to be human. I mean, your radiance as a mother just glows wherever you go. And the job you had before that, which I witnessed, People United for Children, I could not understand how you did that. I mean, just that one case we went through with the Handy family and seeing the injustices in court. I mean, everybody was a liar in that court. I mean, they were lying about this man giving his child gonorrhea.
Oh, yeah.
And I had a video of the doctor saying she never had video. And they wouldn't accept it in court. I had a video of the doctor saying she never had video.
And
I mean,
accepted it as evidence.
gonorrhea.
Oh, yeah.
And they wouldn't let me show it. They wouldn't. And I couldn't believe it. I'm thinking, oh, I'm all gun-ho. I've got the evidence right here. Guys, this guy shouldn't be in jail because his wife, she would have killed him if he had given her anything or even touched her. Just the thought of seeing how beautiful the family was. And then what was so really irate about it, they threatened to put him in jail because he wouldn't tell them where his wife was. She was pregnant at the time, had a baby, and they wanted to take the newborn child from her. All this on a bogus test that a cop knew somebody. This is in Staten Island, so all sorts of stuff was concerned.
Oh, yeah.
There were gangster things in there. I won't mention the movement, the mafia, okay? I mean, I hate to tell the real story, but this man was threatened, and because of a false claim of a doctor who knew some people in a hospital.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he was framed.
Hospitals and doctors are mandated reporters. Teachers are mandated reporters. You have a certain select group that fit that category. And there are people out there who will just say anything about you just to get you deported. You know, if you have a business and they feel the customers that you have should be coming to their shop,
Better get you out the way.
they can get you out of the way. Just say anything. But you know, we have to change all of that. And it's unfortunate that our children, and I should say, when I say our children, I mean all children within our society here in the U.S., are not really being educated properly. Everyone is being undereducated. And they're being brainwashed with this undereducation because the education is not a full experience of what really happened in this country. So it's very selective. So when you start selecting items that you're going to let people know, and that those items become the truth, and the children of all races believe all of this, they live all of this. And how do you correct that in their minds when you're teaching them a certain way? You're not teaching them the full history. We have people in our community, the black community, who are being trained, are starting to be trained, that people who came here and that were sold over and over again and molested over and over again into slavery and lived in slavery and were passed on from one generation to the next in this slavery market. And they are, they're being trained today in some classes that they came here to help build this country. They were volunteers who came here to help. So they're teaching that to everybody. So if everybody believes that these people came here and they were volunteers, you know,
the brainwashing.
What is going wrong with this story? We must educate our people and our children, all of these children. And there was a time when they used to sing this song, years ago, I remember, and they would say red and yellow, black and white. They are precious in His sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world. The ones who own these areas are the ones who control the education process. They can make you feel good about yourself or bad about yourself. They can make you feel visible or invisible. Many cases when we see people that look like us and we are taught to think certain ways about Africa and what Africans are, who Jamaicans are, who everybody is.
The Willie Lynch syndrome.
Yes, we're taught all of this stuff. And when we see these people and we say, wow, that's those Africans, you know, those are the ones that was swinging on the trees over in Africa. They was the ones who was running around with no clothes on.
And
those are the ones who
Tarzan as the king.
Yes, who had Tarzan, who could speak to the animals, he could speak every language, he could do all of this stuff. And what is really so interesting about Tarzan, it's not even that they had Tarzan as a king. They had Tarzan because he was white.
Yeah.
So it helps push the agenda of whiteness being the one and only part of our society that has the truth, that has the knowledge, that can speak to the birds, the tigers, the elephants, and anybody. He is the one. And everybody's running to that one so that they can learn from him, get advice from him, get whatever it is they need from him. It's like you're put in a place and you're trained in a way that you are nothing. You have no meaning. You have no purpose. You have no anything within this world. You haven't created anything. You've never done anything. You know, it's like, who are we? And it's unfortunate that many of us in our society have been trained in this way for so long that we don't really reach out in ways where we can re-educate ourselves, because there are books out there. What do they say? If you want to hide something from somebody, put it in a book. There are books out there that explain who you are, that talk about who you are, you know, and it's interesting all the things that are done. And when you look at it, the reality is they know what we've done. They know not what was done years ago. And the reason I say they know is because it's in every European museum. It's in every American museum around the world. The various things that people who were red, yellow, black, and white have done and are now sitting in these museums out of their homeland because they are valued, because these are things that weren't done by them in so many ways. But our children need to be able to move forward. Our children need this desperately. Our families need it desperately, so that they can build on their own humanity.
Well, think about how we were raised on Santa Claus and Jesus being white, Tarzan and the pyramids and building the pyramids by brick, and there's not one brick in the pyramids. And they were built 50,000 years ago, not during the time of Moses.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if you discover any of these truths, sometimes they take the truth and put the white edge on it.
Oh, yes,
anything.
very much so.
But if you study white supremacy, you can see where this all comes from. You study the white supremacy of England, where they treated the Scottish and the Irish for 1,000 years.
Yeah, and this was white on white. That's right. White on white.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's their modem. That's their natural instinct to dominate and control. The king's attitude, such as Trump. He's German and Scottish. You know, the DNA of us. But we as people, we were the beginnings of creation. I say this all the time. You know, you go back to our history and we discover that we are the spiritual people of the planet. God is just within
Winston,
us. Yes.
if I may,
Yes.
Yeah.
you know, the Scots and the Irish, there's a book on how the Irish became white.
Oh yeah.
The Scots were not white people. Scots were black people. They are the descendants of Skoda, the daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah, I started. Oh, right.
First,
That's
first
right.
established settlements in what is called Scotland. And that's why it's called Scotland, because of Skoda. She is the patron saint of the Scots. Benjamin Franklin said, God forbid that the Scots get a foothold in this great white nation. And he was calling this place a white nation in the 1700s. So think about his mind,
Yeah.
all right? The Anglos did not want the Scots or the Saxons. The Saxons were black also. The Germans were black. They did not want them getting a foothold here. And you had black kings that ruled from the Netherlands to the Mediterranean, from Russia to the British Isles. There isn't a place that you can go across Western Europe that did not have a black king or queen, including Charlotte of Mecklenburg, who was the grandmother of the king that expelled Donald Trump's grandfather from Germany in 1896.
Yeah.
So Europe is not a white nation. It's not a white area of the world. It is now. But the British sought to get rid of black people. When they talk about the Irish and Ireland, where St. Patrick got rid of the snakes, that was in reference to the Egyptian influence in those islands.
Right. Right.
Many people, blacks, were exported out of Great Britain to the West Indies in Barbados. They were not slaves. They were educated people. They were attorneys, teachers, doctors. They just wanted to get the darker you people out in the 1500s. So we failed to understand the presence of African people in every area of the globe. I have photographs of Japanese who are as dark as you, Sharon,
Oh yes. That's
from the
that's true.
1920s. Chinese, the masters of martial arts came out of Africa. The great Yakuza, a samurai, the first samurai, was an African. So our people have been everywhere, but we're not studying, we're not trying to find out. And this AI is very critical. It's important that people have their hand on a book, not the computer.
Yeah, that's for
Because
sure.
AI is going to falsify a lot of information, and people will be misled by it.
They're changing the books even.
People get
Oh,
the
yeah.
books. You
AI.
gotta get an old book.
But
Yes.
AI is our future. We have to control the AI. No, I think that's what our concentration has to be, because that's the future. AI. That's going to
Question.
rule and is dominating and ruling now.
Question. 40% of all slave owners in the United States were of what group? Do you know?
40%?
Of all slave owners in the United States were of what group?
I would think the English.
No. 40% of all slave owners in the United States were women.
Oh yeah.
Ooh,
Oh.
Women.
that's.
And that is a fact. White women. It was owning slaves.
What, their
gave you
husbands died or
financial-
something?
I'm sorry?
Their husbands died or something?
No. George Washington's wife owned 80 some odd slaves when he married her. He only had 8. Financial security was held by women in the ownership of slaves.
I never heard that.
40%. Yeah, I just found that out this year. 40% of all slave owners were women. And the law was to convert the ownership from the woman to the husband upon marriage. But women fought and went to court to maintain their financial security so that a husband could not just marry them to get rich, just as white men married into the native tribes of America to steal the oil. You see, we saw the same pattern in the Midwest when they married into the tribes of the indigenous people and then killed the women in
Yeah.
order to get the land. The ownership was in the name of the woman. in the native tribes.
I mean, when you study the genocide that happened here in America, it's devastating to really understand the way the American Indian was treated. And our 400 years is another story. But to see how we were dragged here and spent 400 years here, and now we're worrying about who's going to vote for who this year, let's update ourselves and deal with today. What do we do today with Biden sending guns over to Gaza and Gaza starving to death, and Trump on trial?
and still
And
on the
it's a
campaign
joke.
trail.
It's a joke.
He's
that
still
people
on the
even-
campaign trail. That's what got me. He's stumping around.
This
Unbelievable.
has got to be a joke.
Yeah, this is unbelievable.
This has got to be a joke.
Yeah, this is
I don't
unbelievable.
understand how we are in the situation that we're in. I'm starting to laugh at it. I say, God, I mean, you're testing us, aren't you? Because I know you're going to come through and clean this stuff up. Because there ain't nothing righteous about this. I just can't fathom that this can go on much longer. Where is the reality check? I mean, God's got to come out and say something.
Yeah, you gotta do
So
something.
we got to stand up.
That's right.
His
You're gonna do
people.
You
something.
got to stand up.
That's
and
right.
People who believe in righteousness and love, and love is what we got to project.
That's true.
Like they say that you didn't forgive as well as Yusuf forgave. But Yusuf is just shining. Now that shows me that I got to shine too.
That's right.
No
Yeah,
matter
shine,
what they throw at you.
That's right.
Don't
They
learn
can't
to
break
hate.
you.
Don't learn to hate
I didn't
anybody.
learn to hate.
Don't
I
let
didn't
them
I'm
learn
not
to.
saying you did.
I know.
I say you less forgiving. I mean, that's somebody's other opinion.
Well, I forgive every day.
Okay.
It's always somebody
I
I'm
knew
forgiving.
you do.
That's a good thing.
That was
Yeah,
somebody
That's
else's
how you
But I
keep
opinion.
getting
remember too.
blessed.
That was
I
somebody
remember
else's
too.
That's right, and you keep getting blessed that by
You know?
forgiveness.
Yes,
got it.
I wanted to just say
No, but
really quickly, and I heard y'all talking about the education. This is something that just happened Monday while I was in Albany with
Okay.
this group of young kids that was from Syracuse. They were called the Youth Advisory Board, and I was kind of sort of like their chaperone to take them to visit to certain legislators. Prior to us going on these visits, kind of sort of like getting familiar with them, tell them a little bit who I am, what my history is, and what I do. And I mentioned that I was a member of the National Action Network under the Reverend Al Sharpton. And when I said that, they looked up in the sky like the Twilight Zone. And I said, National Action Network, Reverend Al Sharpton. And they was like, who's that? I was really taken aback. That's one incident. Then I mentioned about formerly incarcerated. I identified myself as a formerly incarcerated person and reformed my life and came out and I'm doing yada, yada, yada. And I said, just like the Central Park Jogger 5, one of the convicted youth is now a city councilman. And they looked up in the sky again. And I said, you never heard of the Central Park 5 Jogger? And they shake their head. That was,
how old were these people?
these was like middle school or high school, somewhere between that gap. And I just could not believe that they never heard of Reverend Sharpton. They never heard about the Central Park jogger case, and they live in Syracuse. And I'm like,
Syracuse. Okay.
Syracuse.
Well,
so what are they teaching? Like
That's a
we just
different
talked
world.
about the miseducation and no education, and what then? I mean, it really blew my mind. Reverend Sharpton, you never heard about. The National Action Network, you never heard about. And you never heard about the Central Park jogger case? And you're only in Syracuse. Unbelievable. That just speaks to what you were just mentioning. But I hadn't
different-
mentioned that.
Different world.
I was
It's
shocked.
a different world.
I was shocked.
It's
Couldn't
a-
believe it.
The variations in how we feel about ourselves from the age that we are and the way we were brought up to be straight shooters. I was always taught, try and be fair with people. And today it's a con. I mean, the slicks. I mean, that was always there. I mean, just because I was taught to try and always be fair doesn't mean everybody else was taught that way.
For sure.
But I always thought that if you worked hard and did right, that you would get ahead in life. And it managed to be true. But the obstacles that are on your face, it goes back to a subject we tried to cover a couple of times, is your mental stress.
Health. Yeah,
The stress and strain of being black in America
Mm-hmm.
can drive you crazy,
that's right.
especially when you're wrongfully convicted. So let's deal with a little bit about madness. Run item 2 real quick, and this is how it is to be black in Canada, a white man's country. Well, America's white man's country.
These people don't need to be rude to black people and then be nice to white people because we're all the same in our unique colors.
Decades and decades of racism has an impact on black Canadians. And it's not just mental health. It affects everyday interactions, like the kinds of talks parents have with their children to make sure they don't become bigger targets. That's just one example of multi-generational trauma. With us to talk about this and ways to move forward is clinical therapist and registered social worker Leo D. Edwards and mental health advocate Asante Houghton. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
Asante, can you talk a little bit about intergenerational trauma and how that relates to mental health right now?
It is sometimes said that trauma is passed down through generations. And what that means is that if I experience a trauma and I'm affected with my mental health, there are going to be impacts in my social life, my family life, my economic life. And then if I've been mistreated and abused, I learn a certain way to move through the world that may not be conducive to or may not be adaptive to me. So then I'm passing that down to my children. And that's what they're learning. And then they're passing it down to their children. And without any intervention, which can look personal, familial, and systemic, those things carry on and move forward throughout generations.
Let's talk about bias, because a lot of people, I think, are afraid to be pointed to or to admit that they have bias. But the truth is, we all have bias. It is based on our lived experience, and sometimes it manifests in hidden ways here in Canada.
I think what is really important when we're talking about race politics and people's identity is often folks' intentions may be pure and may be honest, but the impact on the other end can be really, really helpful. So what I would advise is that it is really important that if folks are unsure about what needs to be said in conversation to the black people and the black community, is that they should research and be connected.
And what do you tell them? What are some tips that you give them or advice dealing with the situation that we're all living in right now?
One is ensuring that your basic needs are being met, so that you're drinking water and you're eating well and you're sleeping. I think another one that is important to talk about is really feeling all your feelings. So if you feel rage and you feel frustration and you feel sad, that is all right. Those are very valid feelings to have in this moment. And I think another one as well is celebrating Black joy and community. Our experience, although individual, is very collective. And so it will be really important to celebrate Black joy and to affirm their identity and their Blackness, because Black is indeed beautiful and powerful.
Asante, you are a mental health advocate. You are also a father. How have you explained what's happening in the world to your child? And also, what is the talk that many Black parents have to have right now?
The challenge for me is, one, being able to articulate what is happening in the world and how they might experience the world, because they're often confused about why did I, for instance, with my own kid, why are some kids allowed to wear hoodies in the lunchroom, but he's not? And we had to take it all the way to the lunch staff and to the principal and really dive deeply into that, as he knows something is happening, but he may not be able to articulate it. Or another instance where he was in a store and his friend might have been doing something that he shouldn't have been doing, and then my reaction to that is a level of anger that it comes out of me, because what I'm trying to do is protect him, because one mistake could be the end of his future. So it's really hard to articulate these things sometimes and to provide the space for those conversations, because you also want to preserve his innocence and not wanting him to deal with adult issues before he's an adult. Unfortunately, the world is treating him like, or may treat him like an adult, and is treating him like an adult before he even gets there. So it's a tough balance.
Leo, Asante, your insight has been so valuable in this conversation. I thank you so much.
You said some other said that.
Is that I know coming up, I see a lot of people today blaming being black for a lot of their problems. I mean, exclusively.
Mm-hmm.
And it can't always be just you being black. It's how you perceive yourself. It's how you see yourself, what you're conditioned to think of what you are. Now, the difference between us as kids and the way kids are today, I see them because they're uneducated. They don't receive the same education we did. And they fall by the wayside. And plus the planned genocide of crack and the rest of the things. When America was more religious or less racist, I mean, it was never a time, I don't know how to put it, but it's a mental strain, more of a mental strain today as it was yesterday. Am I wrong? And what are your interpretations of what they said here about what you have to train your son to believe? I mean, you're the classic example. You taught your son the right way to deal with it. How many other women are there out there like you?
Quite a few.
Mm-hmm. There are quite a few.
Yes.
And
yes, quite a few.
And that's why we survive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right. And part of it too is that when I grew up in a segregated community.
Ah, okay.
And so in the younger years, I was not a part directly of the hatred and stuff,
right.
Even though I was a part of it,
right.
Because there were people around me who were white and other colors, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
But our families try to instill in us information and knowledge that would help us to survive on either side. It wasn't that we grew up having a whole lot of white friends. We didn't have any friends. There were white people who lived, I would like to say, let's say 2 blocks from us.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't play with those children and they didn't play with us. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like a system now where you claim that you have full integration.
Right.
But you're more segregated than ever.
Especially on Sundays.
And when you are segregated and then you are in this system that doesn't believe that you are segregated, that you can do all kinds of stuff. It's almost like when you mentioned earlier about how the majority of the people who owned slaves were white.
Women.
White women, yes. Now, that group of people who were white women are also part of the same group when we received our, what should I say, our rights after the civil disobedience and disturbances and all of that seemed settled down. They made certain conditions for a class of people who had been subjected to abuses. And the majority of those people, let's say, were black. But there was an odd group that was within that group. And that group was white women. So they was put into the same group as if they had been slaves, their children had been torn away from them, they hadn't had any ownership of slaves, they weren't made rich by slaves, but they were part of that same group of people who had been wronged, these white women. And so now we have a group of women who benefited from the atrocities that went on, and they're moving up the ladder faster than the people who were subject to the atrocities just because of this classification. You know, it's an interesting process when you look at where we are today and you say to yourself, well, how many of our kids really have friends of a different color? How many of them go and have dinner with somebody who is different from them? You know, Spanish, Chinese, Indian, whatever, white, whatever. How many? We have not moved beyond segregation. But where we are, we call it something different because we are supposed to be integrated now. Everything's supposed to have equal opportunities. But within that frame of the equal opportunity, there are schools that get more money than others. There are places that get more books than others. There are people that we are taught about more readily than others. Where does the integration come into that? Where do we become part of the full society that's supposed to exist around us? That's in this non-existent world, we have moved forward. We are visible in an invisible way. There's still women who have PhDs who are black who can't find jobs, men who can't find jobs. There are people who are master's degrees who also can't find jobs, who are certain colors. You know, when we have these expectations like we had after the civil rights movement was over, we had expectations of an entry that would allow us to prosper and live in peace. And we wanted this peace. We also wanted reparations. But in a way, the reparations never came. But we still tried to get to peace. But we were still marginalized and the peace never happened. Now there are some that get it. Because what do they say? The old people used to say, there's always room for one when they talk about people of color. But the door is not open for everybody to go through.
Well, we have to change our way of thinking.
Yes, we got to open that door so we can all go through.
We've got to understand that we're one team, and that's what we try and do here every week.
Yes.
There's one race, the human race. So I'm not excluding any color.
Right.
But those of you that have been crucified in your own concept of yourself and realize that we all have to be human and be fair to one another and take the idea that God is real and that the only way out of this problem of the way humans treat each other is to be human and love. And God is love.
That's true.
It's that simple.
But meanwhile, you still need someone who knows and who can express in an understandable way how to achieve that humanness. Because I think in my black community, we're human. There are white people who think that they're human. Everybody's thinking that they're human, but they're human in their way. How do we come together? That's what we need to do. How do we figure out how we can come together as one?
You've got to get the black people in our community who think of themselves as niggers. Nigger is the word for low life. So that comes in all
Who gave us that low life word? Who?
We give it to ourselves now.
Yes, but that's because, what did the woman say? That's because there is generations that have been passed on and on and on, and we are living in that generation because we haven't been moved out of it.
Right. The kids today don't use it the same way. They don't. It doesn't even bother them to say nigger. It's a passé word. You my nigger, and that's all comes with all colors. You see the Spanish kids You mind?
That's
And
like
then you look
language.
at it,
Yeah.
Creates
and
perception.
you can't get annoyed at it, and you're the only black one in the crowd.
Right.
And they're calling each other,
Right.
and they're whiter than white. Yeah,
Well,
I
that's where
mean,
education
so
comes in.
it's the
Re-education.
generational gap
That's right.
and how you treat one another. But the insanity of being young today, because of the brainwashing and the rest of it, Graham, you got to go. Oh, you're gone already.
Yep.
These
Graham's-
things happen.
Well,
He's got to go.
it's been interesting.
Yes.
We didn't get to the mental, I guess we touched on it.
Yeah.
Mental
We'll get
disease.
to that next time.
Next time.
Don't
All
worry about
right, but this has been,
Next time.
any closing remarks?
We're going to work on ourselves,
That's right.
and we're going to work on each other.
That's it.
That's right.
And we're going to try to go out and find some friend, somebody who looks different than us,
Oh, that's easy.
and find us a new friend.
Yeah.
So we're
Make a
going to
new
start
friend,
that
right?
process. We're going to make a new friend.
And we're going to
And
help
New York is the easiest
people
place to do it.
change
I don't
the
know.
language
Yes.
of how we address ourselves and how we allow others to address us, because
Yeah.
language creates perception.
Yes.
And when you use certain words, automatically it conjures up in a person's mind of who you are.
That's right.
So I think that we have to push our community
Mm-hmm.
and our youth and the people that we interact with in
Yes.
changing that language so that they will get rid of the concept, like you indicated, about my nigga, my dog. I ain't nobody's dog. You joking? I ain't never been and never will be nobody's dog. I could
Yes.
be your friend, your main man, your honcho, your partner, but I ain't nobody's dog. And I'm not your nigga. And I think that whenever we hear that terminology, we need to correct it.
Yes,
we got to
that's so
stop
true.
it right then and there.
Yes.
I ain't
That
trying
helps
to-
us.
Yeah.
That
I
helps us
ain't-
move
I ain't
forward.
trying that. I ain't dealing with it.
I will.
Right.
You know,
I will.
it comes, I ain't gonna fight over that.
No, I ain't saying fight now. Ain't
But
gonna
I
be no
used to
fight.
fight over that.
But I think that there's a way to address things.
That used to be a way to
respectfully.
set me off. That used to be somebody else calling somebody else. All right, we have to go. It's closing time. It's 7 seconds. Well, I like to say the God in me loves the God in you, and stay tuned for more of the Gilchrist Experience.
It's a wrap.
I was on point.
We went a little bit over time, but it's okay.
Oh,
Right.
we didn't even put justice in there.
I read once, passingly, about a man named Shakespeare. I only read about him passingly, but I remember one thing he wrote that kind of moved me. He put it in the mouth of Hamlet, I think it was, who said, "To be or not to be." He was in doubt about something. Whether it was nobler in the mind of man to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, moderation, or to take up arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing, end them. And I go for that. If you take up arms, you'll end it. But if you sit around and wait for the one who's in power to make up his mind that he should end it, you'll be waiting a long time. And in my opinion, the young generation of whites, blacks, browns, whatever else there is, you're living at a time of extremism, a time of revolution, a time when there's got to be a change. People in power have misused it, and now there has to be a change, and a better world has to be built, and the only way it's going to be built is with extreme methods. And I, for one, will join in with anyone, don't care what color you are, as long as you want to change this miserable condition that exists on this earth. Thank you.
Malcolm was always involved somewhere in the struggle. And I remember in January